thought there would be a microphone today because I'm quite a soft speaker, so I will try and yell. And if I get croaky towards the end, please forgive me. So as Tony just said, I'll be discussing the experience of spiritual emergency and how it may be considered a parapsychological phenomenon. So first, I should explain the concept of spiritual emergence for you. So spiritual emergence refers to a transcendental and transformative process whereby one's conscious awareness expands or awakens beyond their ordinary level of waking consciousness. And this facilitates enhanced feelings of peace, connectedness, and positive psychological and physical health outcomes. So spiritual emergency is a term that was coined by Stanislav and Christina Grof. It's a play on words in relation to spiritual emergence, and this refers to a transcendental and transformative process a process of spiritual emergence or awakening that includes a state of psychological crisis. So it involves perceived trauma and perceived inability to cope. So spiritual emergency may be considered a transpersonal phenomenon. So the term trans means to go beyond. Transpersonal experiences are those in which the sense of identity or self expands beyond the individual or the personal level to encompass wider aspects of humankind, life, psyche, or cosmos. So spiritual emergency may also be considered a parapsychological phenomenon. Parapsychology involves the scientific investigation of psi phenomena, and this includes extrasensory perception or ESP, which encompasses telepathy, referring to mind-to-mind communication, clairvoyance involving knowledge about an object or event derived from an external physical source, precognition involving knowledge about a future event. Psi also includes psychokinesis, which involves moving objects with the mind, and it involves survival of consciousness phenomena, which includes apparitional experiences. So, for example, the apparent perception of a being or an object in the absence of any material stimulus, such a perception. It involves near-death experiences, referring to experiences reported by individuals who have come very close to physical death. Out-of-body experiences, whereby one perceives their consciousness as being distinct from their physical body. Reincarnation experiences, which involve the sensation that one has lived lifetimes other than his current lifetime. And it also involves mediumship, which involves the purported spirit communication. So altered states of consciousness, the states of consciousness that are different to our ordinary waking state, are believed to be psych-inducing. So what this means is that altered states are believed to help elicit the types of psi phenomena with which parapsychology is concerned. Now, spiritual emergency experiences have been described as an altered state of consciousness. So therefore, it seems reasonable to suggest that spiritual emergency experiences may in themselves be psych-inducing. And indeed, from Groff's perspective, many transpersonal experiences are actually psi experiences. So Groff acknowledged this overlap between transpersonal and psi experiences, or the transpersonal and parapsychology. So 10 main types of spiritual emergency experience have been identified. So I'll rattle off this list for you. They include the Shamanic Crisis, psychic opening, peak experiences, possession states, Kundalini Awakening, past life experiences, dark night of the soul experiences, encounters with UFOs, near-death experiences, and what's known as activation of the central archetype. So I'll further explain each of these experiences in more detail, but it's important to understand that a common spiritual emergency experience will not necessarily fall neatly into a single category. The categories are useful in order to identify certain aspects of an experience, but in real life, an experience would usually encompass various characteristics across these different categories. Okay, so we'll start with the Shamanic Crisis. Shamanism is a traditional healing art involving a body of techniques and activities that supposedly enable its practitioners to access information that is not ordinarily attainable by members of the social group that gave them privileged status. These practitioners use this information in attempts to meet the needs of the group and its members. So shamans regularly and willingly enter into altered states of consciousness. By extrasensory means, they acquire information and they conduct rituals for the purposes of enhancing their community. Shamanism involves survival of consciousness phenomena, including near-death and out-of-body experiences, as well as mediumship phenomena. For example, shamans will often report visions of dying, leaving the physical body. They go on what they term a shamanic journey, whereby they acquire knowledge, they speak to other entities, and they come back with this information and share it with their community. So the calling of a shaman is traditionally characterised by what they term an initiatory sickness, which may involve phenomena such as hallucinations, mystery illnesses, strange eating habits, spontaneous singing, dancing, chanting, or rituals. When this happens in Indigenous culture, in which shamanism is commonly practiced and understood, the individual will generally be provided with the appropriate support because the community is able to recognise what is happening for the person and what it signifies. So that is, in an Indigenous culture, it signifies the calling of a new shaman. So although it's traditionally an Indigenous phenomenon, shamanic-like phenomena may also be experienced by individuals from non-Indigenous cultures, and this appears to be happening more frequently. So during a crisis, these experiences may happen spontaneously or without sufficient knowledge or understanding or support because they're in a culture which doesn't know what these experiences are. And in non-Indigenous cultures, what we're seeing is more of a metaphoric kind of shamanic journey, which will become a little bit clearer later on when I give you a case example. So generally these experiences may continue until the individual recognises that this is some kind of calling and they acknowledge and embrace their role as a shamanic healer. So the experience of psychic opening may involve the emergence of all kinds of psi phenomena. So this might include ESP, psychokinesis, survival phenomena, and episodes of synchronicity which refer to meaningful coincidence. So these experiences may become a crisis if they happen very rapidly or if they happen in an unsupportive environment or if they seriously challenge the individual's existing understanding of the world. So when a person begins to awaken on a psychic level, it can feel like a floodgate has been opened and they might start experiencing all kinds of psi phenomena and it can become really overwhelming for them. Peak experiences were first identified by Abraham Maslow, and he described the phenomena as moments of intense happiness and fulfillment involving deep perception, fascination, and complete absorption in an object or event. So a peak experience involves an altered state of consciousness during which the individual will often experience distortions in their sense of time and space. So this might involve a sense of not being in the physical body as they experience a sense of what is like a unity or a oneness with the universe. They become completely absorbed in their surroundings. During a peak experience, an individual might receive information or insights via extrasensory means, and they might feel like they've gained some insight into the ultimate truth and acquired a deeper understanding of the workings of the universe. So while peak experiences are generally positive states of unity and awe, they may become a crisis if the individual experiences difficulty readjusting after the event. So for example, an individual might try to recapture this peak experience and they might feel dissatisfied with their ordinary life, like life is a bit of a buzzkill now after this big peak. They might also feel that they've been specially chosen to receive this divine information. And this might create a sense of ego inflation or what we term spiritual narcissism. So the individual might start to feel superior to others because they think that they're special, they've been specially chosen to receive this information. Possession states involve the sensation of the mind and body being invaded by a negative spiritual energy or entity with characteristics distinct from one's own. So the possessed individual may experience an altered state of consciousness akin to a dissociative state, during which they display characteristics such as contorted facial and body positions, wild eyes, and altered voice. I knew someone would like Homer. So possession experiences highlight survival of consciousness phenomena, as the possessed individual may feel that they're disconnected from their physical body, like an out-of-body experience, and this is when they feel a sense of another energy or entity taking control. The experience may involve hearing voices that purportedly belong to another entity, or even channeling messages that are supposedly coming from another entity. So when we think of possession states, we think of what we see in the media, this kind of thing. But in reality, it may be more that the individual is not completely taken over by another entity, but they're being influenced, like they have some kind of an attachment of a negative energy or entity. So they can still be in their own body, but another entity is influencing them, and they may feel like they're just not quite themselves. They might feel dark and heavy, and they might have thoughts that feel like they're not quite coming from themselves. The Kundalini Awakening. So Eastern philosophies describe Kundalini as an energy which resides dormant at the base of the spine. And when it awakens, this energy rises up the body through the top of the head. And during this rise, it's believed to stimulate certain stress points throughout the central nervous system. And this creates physiological and psychological reactions as it's attempting to move its way through the body and remove blockages and awaken consciousness. So the awakening of the Kundalini energy can often be accompanied by things like spontaneous, involuntary bodily movements, unusual breathing patterns, localized pain, intense mood swings. Kundalini awakening may also involve the manifestation of survival phenomena. This might include visions or hallucinations, involuntary trance states, and out-of-body experiences. But when it becomes a crisis, it can appear like a full-blown psychotic or a schizophrenic episode. So the experience of Kundalini can be quite dramatic compared to some of the other types of experiences because it does activate the central nervous system. So the individual might have almost like convulsions or involuntary tremors and physiological things. And obviously if something like this happens to them, this can be quite frightening. Past life experiences involve impressions or visions of oneself or events taking place in another historical period or culture. So these experiences highlight ESP phenomena, such as clairvoyant and precognitive visions or impressions of past lives, future lives, even concurrent lives. However, past life experiences predominantly highlight survival phenomena. These experiences are based around the reincarnation hypothesis, which basically suggests that as humans we incarnate over many, many lifetimes. And the idea is that each lifetime involves a balancing of karmic debts that are carried over from other lifetimes. So during a crisis, past life experiences may manifest as psychosomatic symptoms and profound psychological reactions to individuals or events, and these reactions may seem really out of proportion to the current situation. So for example, an individual might experience themselves seemingly role-playing with another person. It's as if they're remembering relationship dynamics or patterns of behaviour that don't seem quite in accord with the current lifetime. These experiences might also manifest as extreme feelings, either positive or negative, towards an individual or situation. You know, sometimes you just meet someone and you just don't like them and you have no idea why. Because again, these feelings might seem out of proportion to the current situation. You can't really understand why you feel so intensely about someone or something. So psychosomatic symptoms might be in accord with how an individual died in another lifetime. For example, an individual might have an intense phobia of water, and this might correspond to an experience of drowning in the previous lifetime. But when successfully integrated, if the individual is able to sort of re-experience what they're feeling and put it in context, then the psychosomatic and psychological symptoms will generally disappear. The experience known as Dark Night of the Soul derives from the writings of the 16th century Spanish monk St. John of the Cross. It describes a period of isolation and despair, during which one feels cut off from a higher force or some kind of divine source. During a dark night experience, an individual may feel feelings of claustrophobia and restlessness. They might be tormented by evil thoughts and forced to confront their fears in order to satisfy an intense desire for freedom. So this experience can often seem very similar to clinical depression. If the experience reaches a crisis point, the individual may start to feel as if they're actually dying. And this sense of mortality it's metaphoric. It signifies a shift from an old to a new way of being. And it is essentially a death of the ego. So we all have an ego which serves as a protective mechanism. However, as we transcend to higher levels of awareness, we begin to let go of those aspects of the ego that are no longer serving us. But the ego will cling on for dear life because it doesn't want us to leave it behind. And this can result in this sense of struggle that is inherent to this type of experience. So for some people, this sense of metaphoric death can actually feel like a near-death experience where they feel that they're coming close to physical death. Successful integration is generally characterised by a sense of being reborn. So that is, if the individual is able to successfully shed these aspects of the ego that are no longer serving them, they will feel a sense of liberation and a sense of renewal. Okay, we've just seen a lot about this, so I won't talk too much about this one. As the name suggests, UFO experiences involve the belief that one has encountered other life forms or worlds. So the experience itself may be reported as traumatic, and individuals may feel like they've been harmed or violated in some way. And this sense of trauma may be enough to facilitate a crisis. So experiences will often display symptoms commonly associated with post-traumatic stress and adjustment disorders, such as anxiety, phobias, sleeping disorders. The experience may also become a crisis, again, if the individual has difficulties in integrating the experience into their worldview. So if this happens to someone who has no prior belief in something like this, then they think, how do I integrate this into my understanding of the world? So for example, individuals often report receiving information from these other entities that seriously challenges their understanding of the world. And this can lead to a dramatic period whereby they have to restructure their thinking. So UFO experiences may be associated again with all types of psi phenomena. For example, individuals may report that they've communicated with other life forms via telepathy. They may have received insights via clairvoyance or precognition. They may observe or directly experience psychokinesis. They may also report survival phenomena such as out-of-body experiences. And there have been reports of people suggestive of past and future lives, that they report receiving information where they've seen future lives or concurrent lives, alternate universes and things like that. And these are indicative of the reincarnation hypothesis. However, if successfully integrated, these experiences often lead to increased intuitive abilities and a general greater appreciation of others in the environment. So the near-death experience has been investigated extensively by a researcher called Raymond Moody. And he found that individuals who have come very close to physical death will often report common phenomena. And this generally involves witnessing some kind of a life review, their life flashing before their eyes, travelling through tunnels of white light, being greeted by other entities or deceased loved ones, and eventually receiving some kind of information which eventually causes them to return to their physical body. So the most obvious psi phenomena associated with this type of experience is survival of consciousness. For example, individuals often report apparitions or visions of deceased loved ones or other spiritual entities, such as angels, for example. They often report feeling that their consciousness has left their physical body, and that they might see their body as an outside observer with events taking place around it. For example, people who have been on an operating table might report that they were standing at the side of the room and they were watching the medical people working on their body. Individuals generally report having communicated with deceased loved ones or some other kind of entity, who often greet them, make them feel safe, and then give them some kind of information encouraging them to return to their physical body. So it's not your time to die, kind of thing. And this may become a crisis if the individual is not happy about having to return to their physical body, like they've experienced a state of bliss that they really liked and they wanted to go there, like a feeling of going home, and then they come back to their physical body and they think, I don't want to be here anymore. And again, this type of experience might also seriously challenge an individual's existing understanding of the world. So activation of the central archetype. The psychologist Carl Jung described archetypes as primordial patterns that emerge through the collective unconscious and form the basis of most traditional legends, mythologies and religions. So this concept is a little bit hard to wrap your head around, but essentially Jung believed that the collective unconscious is a structure of the unconscious mind that is accessible to all beings from the same species. So it's kind of like an unconscious mind, but that we all have access to. And he believed that these archetypes are like universal symbols that we all identify with, and they shape our conscious mind and our behaviour. So we might identify with various types of archetypes throughout our lifetime, but the central or the self archetype represents a sense of psychic wholeness, completeness. So when the central archetype is activated, the individual is generally bombarded with really dramatic, personally significant imagery in these archetypal motives. So, for example, the experience is often characterised by really dramatic themes of death and destruction, followed by rebirth and regeneration. An individual might feel like they're at the centre of cosmic events that hold great significance for everyone around them and for the rest of humanity. It's quite a dramatic experience. And this metaphoric sense of death and rebirth may activate memories and imagery that are so cataclysmic in nature that the individual feels really frightened and they feel isolated, and this might then lead them to a state of crisis. So a central archetype experience might be associated with various forms of psi, including ESP and survival phenomena. For example, an individual may receive insights into the nature of reality through clairvoyance. They might receive information about from future or from current lifetimes via precognition. And they might be bombarded with memories from previous lifetimes, consistent with the reincarnation hypothesis. So when an individual experiences a return to the centre, it's almost as if all of their experiences from previous lifetimes come rushing in to meet them in this current one. And this can be very overwhelming. However, if the experience can be successfully integrated, the individual will often achieve a sense of rebirth and a sense of being replenished or renewed and a sense of wholeness. Okay, so at this point, I think it's fairly obvious that the experience of spiritual emergency is very messy. It's a common experience, as I said before, doesn't necessarily fit neatly into one of these categories. This is just a way for us psychologists to try and make it easy to understand, but in reality it may encompass phenomena from all these different types or a number of the different types, and it's very messy. But they all share a common characteristic in that they're associated with some kind of psi phenomena. And the other common theme that's laced throughout these various types of experiences is this theme of metaphoric death and rebirth. So this is because the experience of spiritual emergency is essentially a process of purification and renewal. So one needs to shed an old way of being in order to make way for a new way of being. Okay, so now I'm going to attempt to bring all this information together for you and give you a very brief rundown of my own experience of spiritual emergency. So it all began when I met a man and I fell in love. And falling in love can be a powerful catalyst for this type of experience. For me, I felt like it unlocked a door within me. Like there had always been something that was lying dormant that I kind of knew was there, but meeting this person just activated it. So it was like it unlocked a door to my soul, in a sense. And in the beginning, it was all wonderful. I was experiencing a psychic opening, but it wasn't a crisis. It was, I was having all kinds of experiences like precognition and telepathy and out-of-body and peak experiences, and it was mind-blowing and amazing. So I enjoyed it for a while. And in the beginning, I began to believe that my boyfriend was a reincarnation of Jesus. I felt like I could see this glow around him, and I thought, wow, he's creating such magical changes in a person, and he must be Jesus. Come on. There were all kinds of signs that were just indicating, yes, it's Jesus reincarnated. So now I see in hindsight, getting quite delusional, but at the time it made perfect sense.
He's very good looking.
Oh, he was quite good looking. Not so much to me now. He's very good looking, and yes, he's very charismatic, and he did have this wonderful glow around him, and a natural healing type of person who did activate certain things. So I began to feel like we were at the centre of some cosmic events, like the central archetype was being activated. So it started to feel like, he was Jesus and he'd been sent to me, and we were on some kind of sacred mission, and the whole world depended on the work that we were going to do together. So it was very big and dramatic. So I started to experience some of that ego inflation. Oh wow, I've been chosen, maybe I'm Mary Magdalene reincarnated. So it was all these biblical kind of things, and I am not a religious person. I went to Catholic school, so I guess there was that understanding of these religious motives, but it felt like it was on such a grand scale that I used to think, everyone who's looking at us must be able to see that we're so special. How can everyone not see this? So for a while it was all wonderful, and then it started to get a little bit strange. Like we were kind of role playing. It felt like these past life sort of things were coming in, whereby it felt like things were a little bit out of proportion to the current situation. So I would feel like I was a character in a story, and he was a character. And we were kind of role playing. It was a bit weird, but sometimes we would sit back and we would both say, "That was really weird, wasn't it?" And we just didn't quite understand what was happening. So around this time, the relationship began to turn quite toxic, and we were just really triggering one another, and it became quite emotionally abusive. We were essentially bringing out each other's dark side. So where it started out all light, somehow made that transition over to the dark side. So around this point, I felt like I had been deceived. My boyfriend was not Jesus, he was Satan. So I became quite obsessed with these biblical references to end of world times, and I think there's a passage in the Bible that says that when Satan comes back, he's going to trick everyone into thinking that he's Jesus. And I thought, that's what he's done to me. He must be Satan. So I was convinced that the world was going to end, but I was on this mission, and if I could just turn things around, everything would be okay. So we were in this cosmic battle. It felt like every day was just a battle, and in my mind I was dressed in armour, and we were, battling with swords, and it was crazy. A battle of good versus evil and light versus darkness. So these real dramatic central archetype themes. So quite understandably, my health began to deteriorate. I developed glandular fever, adrenal fatigue, I had a thyroid problem, my body was just a mess. I went to see a chiropractor, and she couldn't believe I hadn't been in a car accident. She said I had the physical symptoms of whiplash, so it was bad. I became quite distant from my family and friends. This was partly due to the abusive nature of the relationship, which tends to happen, but it was also because of this ego inflation where I just felt like I couldn't relate to people anymore. Just couldn't talk to people anymore. Eventually the relationship came to an end. I'll spare you all the gory details, but it came to an end, and I felt like my soul was dead. I felt like we'd been in this massive battle and I was just an empty shell. So for me, this was symbolic of this metaphoric death. So during the time that I was with this man, I actually met another man, and he's now my husband. So there is a hero to the story. So I began to think of him as my guardian angel. Again, there's this kind of delusional thought. He would pop up in my life at times where I just really needed a boost, like things would be really bad for me, and then I'd see him just randomly, and he made me feel like myself again, and he made me feel safe. So he was like my guardian angel. And when the relationship with my ex-boyfriend ended, I was kind of a zombie for a while, and I would just wander around the streets, and I'd be calling out my now husband's name in my head, be calling out saying, "Where are you? Come and rescue me. I'm here, I'm waiting for you." And then through a series of synchronistic events, it actually turned out we were living across the street from one another, and we had been for 6 months and we didn't know. So it was quite random. I was walking down the street, a car pulled up next to me, I thought, is someone stalking me? And out stepped my husband, and we realised, oh, I live over here and I live over here. So that was kind of weird. So we started dating, and now we're married. But he didn't quite realise the extent to which I was just really damaged, and I felt really dead inside. So during this time I was quite depressed. I cried a lot, my body was still just feeling horrible, my health was still in a bad way. So this essentially for me was my dark night of the soul. So over time, with the help of my lovely angelic husband, I did begin to repair. However, I felt for a time like I had taken on some of my ex-boyfriend's demons. It was almost like I had given him some kind of an exorcism, but I hadn't released the demons myself, or I was just, I was somehow channeling the darkness that had been there in our relationship. For example, I would find myself speaking and behaving in ways that really reminded me of him, or I would find myself having these dark thoughts, and I would be really angry and I would attack people, and I would think, but I'm sure that's not coming from me. So in a sense, I felt kind of possessed, or I felt a bit influenced. Like I had carried some attachments from the relationship. So I had to work really hard to free myself from this sense of enslavement. I felt like I was still in chains, even though the relationship had ended and I had broken away. In a metaphoric sense, I was still in chains. So over time, and with the help of probably every mental health practitioner in Melbourne, I did the rounds a few times, as well as intense inner work, I did begin to shed these old skins and I began to break free. But it was a long and painful journey home. So just this year actually, nearly 12 years after this initial spiritual awakening, things really came to a head for me. Quite literally, I shaved all my hair off. I got a bad haircut and I thought, okay, I'm going to do it. It's something I'd always wanted to do. Shaved all my hair off. And when I did this, it was so bizarre. It was like I had been carrying all this stuff in my hair and it had been holding me back. And shaving my hair off, it's like it just stripped away whatever remnants were still there. So I had like this peak experience, and I felt like I was channeling all kinds of whatever, I don't know. It was a peak experience and it felt really good. And I felt like I had woken up. I felt like I had been in a cave, like a bear that was hibernating. All of a sudden, without my hair, magically I stepped out into the world and I felt awake again. I felt alive. And I felt reconnected again, which made me realise the extent to which I had become quite disconnected just from the world around me. So I began to look around at the world the way a child does, looking around with new eyes. And I began to recognise people on a different level, almost like I could see people on more of a soul level. So as you can see from my experience, there are a lot of different psi phenomena involved here over a number of these different categories. But another one that I would like to highlight is that this experience may be compared to that of the Shamanic Crisis. So during a shamanic journey, the individual will often travel to what they call the underworld or the lower world, and this is generally where they will encounter terrifying trials and ordeals, be forced to confront demons and face their fears. So for me in my story, my boyfriend, I realise now that he's not the devil, but in my story, he was kind of like my tour guide to the underworld. And he, encouraged me to face my fears, confront my demons, and go through that metaphoric battle. So during a shamanic journey, the individual often will also meet allies and mentors who help them along their path back home. So my husband was one of those people for me. And another one of those people has been my mentor and supervisor, Dr. Adam Rock. I met Adam in 2011 and I worked as his research assistant. And funnily enough, the project we were working on was investigating shamanic journeying. So Adam encouraged me to undertake a PhD in the area of spiritual emergency, which I had been looking at in my undergrad studies. And this experience has helped me to research these experiences and understand and integrate my own experiences and basically re-enter the world as a more complete person and to be able to share my experiences now with others. So in a shamanic sense, this can actually be like the ultimate goal of a shaman. The shaman returns from their journey with some kind of, they call it an elixir, or some kind of a gift. And this can be, for example, in my experience, to share my experience with other people in order to hopefully help facilitate healing. So if anyone wants more information on this kind of shamanic journey idea, this concept is explained more clearly in Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey, and there are various people who have written the hero's journey is quite complex and difficult to understand, but there are people who have written it in a more user-friendly way. So the hero's journey framework is a useful therapeutic tool for understanding the process of spiritual emergency. And in particular, for someone who's undertaking a spiritual emergency and might be stuck in a various aspect of it, understanding the hero's journey can help the person to find their way back home if they're able to identify with a certain aspect of the journey that they might be stuck in. So in other words, if a person has experienced this sense of metaphoric death, how do they then achieve this sense of rebirth? So the experience of metaphoric death can be excruciatingly painful, and it might feel like literal death, as I mentioned before. And unfortunately, many people can't and do not move past this stage. So some people might remain stuck in an indefinite state of psychological crisis, or in some severe cases, clinical psychosis. However, if the individual is offered understanding and appropriate support, which enables them to experience this sense of metaphoric rebirth, then they will generally feel a sense of being liberated. So, in my opinion, a key aspect to helping someone successfully integrate this type of experience is validation. So that is, the individual needs to be reassured that their experience is a natural process of renewal and purification. I also believe it's important to understand that spiritual emergency and spiritual emergence in general is cyclical in nature. What I mean is that an individual may move through the renewal process numerous times, each time experiencing this metaphoric sense of death and rebirth, but each time moving to higher levels of awakening. So, for example, just because I have experienced a sense of rebirth, it doesn't mean I'm an enlightened person then, but I have all the answers now. It means I've completed a cycle, which will now enable me to go through the whole process again and complete a new cycle. But now that I have an understanding of how the cycle kind of operates, then hopefully I can go with the flow a little bit more if it happens again, and go with that cyclical nature of the process. So I believe that understanding is key, because with understanding and knowledge comes power. And the experience of spiritual emergency is essentially us coming into our power. I also believe that the most important tool or key to unlock the potential that these experiences hold is balance. Because with a sense of balance comes a sense of peace. And when we're in a state of peace, we're just a lot more productive, we're a lot calmer, and process things more effectively. So, just some advice for people. These are things that have helped me to achieve a sense of balance and calm, and to work through my own process. I just recommend these basics. So, eat healthy, nourishing food. Engage in regular exercise that you enjoy, so that it's fun. You might try yoga, meditation or mindfulness to calm the mind and the body. Do some gardening or anything that helps you reconnect with nature. Reconnecting is an important aspect because we can feel disconnected when these types of things happen. So either just go out into the garden with bare feet or put your feet in the ground, that kind of thing. Love yourself and show love to others, and be kind to yourself and be kind to others. And essentially just remember that whatever you put out into the world, you'll get back in return. So that is it from me today. Yes, I can take questions. If anybody wants to share their experiences or connect with me, you can email me or you can follow me on Instagram. And I will be conducting research later for next year. The research is ongoing, and the next phase of my research is to actually conduct interviews with people who have had these types of experiences. So if anybody feels that they have and they would like to be part of research, then please come and talk to me or contact me.
And we have some time for some questions, so would anyone like to ask Kylie a question? Yes?
Because I'm interested in associations, the subject of the, because I'm doing psychology as well, so where does one, the clinical aspects, I mean, you talk about possession, how does that differ from DID? At which point do you say, I find that part difficult. How do you actually see a person a treatment for DID?
Yeah, this is where it does.
That's a dissociative disorder.
Yeah. This is where it does get a little bit grey because in some cases of possession it might seem like dissociative identity disorder. So this is the grey area where you will have mainstream clinicians saying that it's purely it's got nothing, there's no spiritual component to it, it's just some kind of disorder. Then you will have the hardcore spiritual people saying, oh no, it must be a spiritual thing. I tend to fall somewhere in between. I think that maybe some cases of clinically diagnosed disorders have been inaccurately diagnosed and they may actually have a spiritual component, whereas others may not have a spiritual component. So I think it's just really each individual case you would have to just try and engage with the person and find out on an individual level. If they're talking in a spiritual sense, if there's a lot of metaphor and symbolism in their experience, then chances are there may be some kind of spiritual element. So I think it's about not dismissing the person's experience, helping them to feel validated that they're having some kind of meaningful experience and trying to then decipher the meaningful aspects from the pathological. But that is the part where it gets really...
And not to deny your experience, it's just that, like, when you talk about the Jesus component, I mean, how does that differ from someone having some kind of, problem like delusional type thing, as opposed to metaphorical?
Yes. Well, so the thing is, even if the experience does have a strong spiritual component, it can still become pathological in the sense that they are picking up on metaphoric beings and tuning into Jung's archetypes, but due to certain personality characteristics or other variables, it may then get to an extreme level, which does become pathological. For example, with my own experience, I recognised that it was a spiritual experience for me, but it was somewhat delusional because I did start to believe.
So there is a connection.
There is a connection, yes. It's kind of, I find it useful to conceptualise it on a scale. So you've got spiritual experience on one end, pathological experience on the other, and it's not either or. It might be that you fall somewhere along the scale and you might move back and forth on the scale. So this is why having some kind of understanding of this process can help to clarify for someone who's becoming a bit delusional or moving towards the pathological end. It can help kind of pull them back from that pathological end and help them to interpret it in this more spiritual framework.
And I'd also argue that perhaps the context of certain people showing obvious pathological or psychopathological disorder, this doesn't have that underlying meaningfulness So I'd say not even a single scale, you're probably multi-dimensional scale here that things overlap.
Sure, absolutely.
But you also have a context, whereas people that can display similar types of symptoms often don't have that context at all. It comes out of nowhere, and maybe that's also a way to differentiate the two.
Because you want to be careful that you don't spiritualise an experience for someone who doesn't want it to be spiritualised. You know, if someone is an atheist and they're having a pathological experience, they might not want you to talk to them in a spiritual sense or try to explain that there's metaphoric meaning, because that's just not going to resonate with them. So it's about finding the personal meaning for the person and trying to connect with them with whatever framework they're going to understand to help them. So if a spiritual framework will help, then you can try and apply that, but if that's not going to help, then there's no point trying to apply that.
Yes. So just one here.
As you spoke, I was just thinking of Jung's own experience where he said he let himself drop into the unconscious and he let all kinds of archetypes seek free, all these things. But I think in the end it was about letting himself relate to them as much as one can to archetypes, but not identify with them totally. It's when you think you're this one, rather than have a plurality of relationships, but also relation to the other world. And he said it was his relationship to his daily life. It's being a doctor. Something is looking after his family. That kept him also balanced. So what you said, balance is sort of key. So you can call it spiritual, the archetypes. You might just call it archetypes, right? Those physical structures.
That's right. We all have a different framework and understanding. So again, this is where it becomes individual, and you don't want to try and impose your own understanding and your experience onto someone else. It's about letting that person tell you their experience, helping them find a particular meaning of their own. And what you say is important in that if you start identifying too strongly with one of these archetypes, this is when you start to become potentially a bit delusional in thinking that you are this archetype, rather than that you are identifying with the archetype.
But unless it's at least recognised that archetypes exist, that person has no framework.
Exactly, yes.
So what happened here first?
Yes, I can see you have a beautiful aura, so don't take this personally. But it's been said that in relationships they start out in the honeymoon period and then it develops into a power struggle.
Yes.
And then what we see in another person is a mirror of what's in ourselves.
Absolutely. My ex-boyfriend and I are friends now, and we both acknowledged that we were bringing out the darkness in each other. So yes, there was definitely that kind of that mirroring going on. So it's good to come out the other side and then be able to sit down together and reflect and go, wow, that was crazy and really dark, wasn't it? But isn't it cool that we got to have that experience to come out the other side? Thank you.
Yes.
Just in response to the question raised by the woman over there, there's some very interesting work being done with schizophrenia in Brazil at the moment, where it's being treated with a component of Western medicine, talk therapy, and spiritism.
Yes.
Where it's approached from many, many aspects. So there's an externality that's acknowledged in schizophrenia that's persecutory, and it can be looked at in whatever spiritual animistic culture or even in Catholicism, whilst also being treated with other modalities. And so the advantage of that seems to be that you can approach it from any angle that works. And it doesn't really matter whether schizophrenia is an external demon or is a brain function.
Absolutely.
But you allow the patient the choice as to how they view that externality.
Absolutely. I love that idea. I just got back from Brazil earlier in the year, actually.
Okay.
Yes, I was aware of this fact that in a lot of their psychiatric hospitals, they do have mediums who even do hands-on healing type work with the psychiatrists. And I completely agree that I don't think, even though I have my own framework and perspective, I don't want to impose that onto other people who have a different framework, because we all have our own story, we have our own understanding of the world. So I completely agree. Come at it from all angles, and if the person gets better, it doesn't really matter which angle works.
It won't find its way to the DSM, I'm sure. Any other questions? Well, thank you. What we'll do, we'll wrap up this first session. We'll start again for those who want to continue with the day, because as you can see so far it's been wonderful, way above expectation. At 1 o'clock we'll come back here for part 2, so please come back. I hope you see that.